Oh, that's a nice little bit of music to bring us in here. Hi, everybody, and welcome to. Geez. I'm not entirely sure what to call this. The Radulich and Broadcasting Network, not even a group therapy session. This is a happy remembrance session for the late Roddy Piper. I'm Robert Winfrey. I'm kind of going to be playing ringmaster here, trying to kind of corral everyone, get this thing going properly. Normally at this time, I'd be either halfway through or about wrapping up an episode of Everyone Loves a Bad Guy. News of Piper's death came about, 5-ish local time. I didn't have it in me to do anything else. So for anyone who needs a fix today of Everyone Loves a Bad Guy, the featured episode on our Blog Talk Radio page is the Everyone Loves a Bad Guy that Pat Mullen and I did for Roddy Piper, actually July 25th of last year, so just a little over a year ago. When I was doing my professional wrestling anthology series, he and I sat down, we talked for nearly 2 hours about Piper and how great he was. So feel free to go back and listen to that. This is just kind of a friendly get-together, share happy stories type deal. Mark kind of insisted on it, and who am I to argue with the boss? So, Mark, normally I say ask you how you're doing, but, it's pretty obvious that we all got, sucker punched yet again by, death a couple of hours ago. But apart from that, how are things going this evening?
I'm okay. In honor of the man of the hour, who we are remembering tonight. Happy remembrances. That's what we're up to tonight. I'm not going to go into any of my normal side tangents about my family and this and that. Suffice it to say, I kind of came home, started grabbing phones and computers and saying, "Hey, we got to do this tonight. I need to talk about this." When the Warrior died, I was pretty broken up. I mean, that was so sudden. We had just seen him on television. He was just there with his girls. There was a lot of projection on my part because those two girls are now growing up without a father, and that hurt me deeply. And the Warrior is probably one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. So I was an absolute mess when he died, and I pulled it enough together for Gavin and I to do one of these type of shows on the Casual Heroes. This time around, and then Dusty passed not that long ago, and I stayed away from that one because out of respect for people who are Dusty fans, the first time I ever saw him on television was, in the WWE, and he was wearing polka dots, and he came out with, this crazy black woman. So that's all I knew of him. I had no idea of his rich history back then. So it was just like, you know what, I'm going to let you guys who grew up with the NWA have that one. This one, I mean, Roddy Piper, he's no warrior, but he's part of my childhood. I'm sitting back right now and I'm watching his documentary on the WWE Network that was put out. That had to have been 2004, 2005, somewhere in there. And they're up to, I think, WrestleMania, I think 4 or 5 right now, where he's wrestling Bret Hart. And, I just have so many happy memories of Roddy Piper. I've been watching wrestling since the original WrestleMania. That's when I got into it. As people have heard me talk about this before. I grew up in Long Island, New York, and Superstars was on Saturday mornings at 12 o'clock. So I would watch the Saturday morning cartoons, and then they would be over, and I would turn to, Channel 5, and there would be Superstars. And I was absolutely in love with what I saw. Even as my father would say, if a guy jumped from the top rope and landed on you with his elbow, he'd kill you. That didn't matter. See, I still, I loved what I saw, and part of that was Roddy Piper. Smashing gold records over Lou Albano's head and coconuts over Jimmy Snuka, having boxing matches with Mr. T. I loved it all.
It was awful.
I didn't care. I was a child. So I was never a Hulkamaniac, and I know you're not supposed to cheer for the bad guys, but I always thought
Hey, who are you talking to here?
Yeah, I know. But even as a child, I always appreciated Roddy Piper and what he brought to the whole rock and wrestling connection and the old war to settle the score. I'm going to go ahead and play producer tonight, and I'll be the one taking calls. And we are taking calls tonight. The number is 323-657-0901. Again, that number is 323-657-0901. You can call and hang out. You can just kind of drop in, give us a few words on the subject. It's your call. You do it how you like. So we're going to take our first caller of the night, Mr. Pat Mullen, who put on Facebook that he's absolutely devastated by the loss of Mr. Piper. So, Pat, what pearls do you have to bring us?
I'm still. You gotta forgive me. I'm still a little bit numb on this one. I don't really think it's set in that Roddy's actually gone, and I don't really want to talk about Roddy being gone because it's hard. And Roddy, even back in that era where it was the Hulkamania era, like you talked about, and WrestleMania, where it was always the bigger, badder guys who tended to be towards the top of the card. Roddy was so good at what he did and was so good at manipulating the audience that despite being barely over 6 feet tall, realistically probably about 235 pounds at his biggest, Roddy was on the top of the card whenever he wanted to be. And not just against Hulk Hogan. Roddy main evented cards all over the country against your Jimmy Snukas, your Rocky Johnsons, and that's just his WWF years. That doesn't even get into account on his lengthy run in the NWA, in the Carolinas, and in California, because he was such a good pro anywhere he went that no matter his size, which a lot of people talk about guys like Randy Savage and Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels being guys to break the size barrier for being in the main event, specifically in WWE. Really, Roddy was doing that well ahead of those guys and doesn't ever really get credit for it. Maybe because he wasn't the most technically gifted performer, but it didn't matter because Roddy was a small guy in a big man's world, and yet he was on the top of the card of all times. And just real quick, one aside I want to mention is kind of a depressing story, but I mentioned this on the Dusty Rhodes show that Gavin and I did. I got to meet Dusty Rhodes shortly, one day before WrestleMania 20 at a Ring of Honor event that they were running in New Jersey. But originally, I was supposed to have met Roddy because he was there to do a Q&A session. And this happened the weekend when they found out that Rob Feinstein, who was part owner of Ring of Honor and head of RF Video, was a pedophile. And because of that, Roddy pulled out of the show. And that was my one chance to meet Roddy. And I had a plan that I was going to get him to sign my They Live DVD, which I spent many happy Sunday afternoons watching on the Channel 11 Sunday afternoon movie. For those of you who grew up in the New York area, you know what I'm talking about. Or on stations like Channel 9, WWOR, where I'd be watching the movie Body Slam with Roddy, Dirk Benedict from the A-Team, and Sam Fatu, who was Roddy's hated on-screen rival, the Tonga Kid. And everybody's got like their Mount Rushmore of guys they loved as a kid, and Roddy's easily on mine because he was always the smaller guy. He was never the biggest guy, never the strongest guy. But Roddy had a fearlessness about him that just I always admired. And it always spoke to me that you're going to come up against people who are bigger than you or stronger than you or faster than you or smarter than you. And if you're willing to take them on head to head, then none of that matters because you've already won. And that was maybe the biggest thing I got just from being a fan of Roddy and following him.
I'm kind of with you on They Live. Crazily enough, as much as I've been a fan of professional wrestling to varying degrees throughout my life so far, my interest ebbs and wanes depending on various factors. I think everyone does kind of, sometimes the product really appeals to you, sometimes it doesn't. I was aware of who Roddy Piper was. My first kind of real exposure to him actually came through They Live. My father bought me that on DVD when I was, for Christmas or my birthday. I can't remember which one. I think it was my birthday. When I was a very early teenage years, he got it because he knew I was aware of who Roddy Piper was. And he's not credited big on the, on the cover art or anything, but I read through the back and, who was starring in it. And look, it's, Roddy. And Oh god, that movie also has one of my favorite fight scenes of all time in it, and anyone who's actually seen the movie can absolutely attest to how glorious that fight sequence between Piper and Keith David is in the back, in the back alley. That I think they tried and failed to replicate at WrestleMania with him and Goldust in many ways. But man, that was that was kind of my first exposure was via that movie. Legitimate exposure to him. I was aware of who he was, but yeah.
And I was such a fan of that movie. Okay, that it used to get regular play on like Channel 11, the Sunday afternoon movie or Saturday night movie when initially right after it was released and became popular. But then it wasn't aired on TV for like over 10 years. And if you actually tried to find it on Amazon or eBay, copies of the VHS were retailing at over $50 a piece, which is ridiculous. And so, this movie hadn't been on for years and years and years. It was the night before I was going to take my SATs, and I decided that it was more important to stay up because they were airing They Live for the first time in over 10 years to get a good night's sleep and be ready for my SATs. So I decided that was what was important. I stayed up and recorded They Live on VHS and regretted none of it and still don't to this day.
That's one of those great kind of cult classic movies that anyone who's seen it, I think, kind of really enjoys it. All right, Mark is having technical difficulties. We've got another caller here. I hope you know your area code because I'm unable to, really kind of screen these things. But area code 724. I should probably know you. I apologize that I don't remember that off the top of my head. How you doing this evening, and what are your memories of Roddy?
It's Larry Zonka. How are you guys?
Hey, Larry. How you doing?
I've been better. Been better, quite honestly, as we all know. Yeah, dude, I don't know. It's another hard one to take, quite honestly. I got an article up on the site about it already. It's one of those things that, like the Dusty Rhodes death, is as I get older and as I've been writing about wrestling more and more, it kind of becomes harder and harder to have to do these articles. It's funny. We watch all this stuff as a kid, and I was listening to you guys talking about all kind of cool stuff and They Live and everything. And there's so much to talk about. I mean, goddamn, we could talk about Piper for 10 hours and not get everything in, And I sit there and I see all these guys that, formed my wrestling fandom and were such a big part of my childhood. And, like Dusty Rhodes was the big hit for me because Dusty Rhodes was my guy. Dusty made me believe that I could do anything when I was a kid. When Dusty was cutting the promo and he reached out his hand, little Larry Zonk was reaching out his hand because Dusty said he could do it, and I believed it, And Piper, I'm not going to sit there and blow smoke. A lot of people do this when wrestlers pass away. I'm not going to be like, oh, I'm such a Roddy Piper fan since I was 6. No. I mean, when I was a kid, I thought Roddy Piper was a dick because he was. He was the bad guy. I wrote in my article, him and Hogan, it was the ultimate clash of good and evil, and they treated Hogan like the god of wrestling, and Roddy Piper was the devil. They were perfect. They were perfect talking to each other. They were perfect in the ring for what it was. I mean, we're not going to sit there and say it was 5-star classic stuff, but what they did was perfect. They talked people into the houses at a time where that was vital for business. And it was just putting them against each other. It was so perfect. And as I've gotten older and as I've become, I guess, kind of more of a historian writing about stuff, you just appreciate the more you learn, the more you go back and watch. I remember when I was a kid, the dog collar match, and I wrote about that. That was just this brutal, real feeling match. I'm like, these guys must hate each other if they're willing to have this chain involved. And then you look back on it and you see the psychology of the match, the work of the ear, the commentary. Everything just works together in this kind of violent, I guess, just violent soap opera. It was just perfect. So I look back at Piper and I can't help but to think, Obviously one of the greatest talkers. Obviously one of the greatest heels. He got it because he talked people into it. But one thing I think some people don't know, and that's due to people not being old enough to remember, the heel commentary work he did in Georgia Championship Wrestling. He was brought in as a heel commentator with Gordon Soley with the design to make him a top heel. But this was really the genesis and the blueprint for what the heel color commentator would be. His work compared to what Soley was doing was amazing. And obviously that goes into the promo work. And then, I mean, you can't talk about Piper without talking about Piper's Pit. I mean, he was the architect for what every wrestler talk show wanted to be, but never achieved. And then you throw in, like, the acting and the stuff he did. It's just, I mean, I don't get, there's some people who go, like, I'm surprised Piper's getting so much mainstream coverage. Well, that's because you're either A, no offense, stupid, or B, aren't old enough to remember. Because without Roddy Piper being part of the rock and wrestling boom period, that doesn't take off. The feud with Hogan, the interaction with Albano and Cyndi Lauper and Mr. T, all that stuff, that's Roddy Piper.
You know, he doesn't necessarily look like the typical, like no one would compare Roddy Piper to Brock Lesnar under the heading badasses. But I remember what the appeal was back in the Rock and Wrestling Connection, Larry, and that's what it was. You know, while Hogan was Superman, and I was never a fan of Superman, Roddy Piper was just a badass. It was a guy who looked like, you know, he could just walk into a bar and punch you right in the face. I mean, I'd love to hear him talk.
He was a guy in a skirt among, you know, these 300-pound, 6'7" guys telling you he's a man's man.
Yeah, he made you believe. You know, other than big, like he made you believe that if you mess with him, you're going to lose your teeth.
Well, that's the thing too. He walked in the ring, and like when I say that Piper didn't have like a bunch of classics, that's not a knock that he was a bad wrestler. I mean, he went into a match and it pretty much looked like a bar fight, like you were talking about. I mean, he went in there. Everybody knew he was a little crazy. Everybody knew he did shit his own way. And that's how it was. And like I said, going back to like that dog collar match when I was a kid, like I said, all I could think of was this feels real. Like these guys loathe each other. And that was part of how things worked with him. And like you said, he wasn't a giant in the land of giants. He wasn't a small guy that did super athletic things. He was different enough that it wasn't like a bad different. It's between what he did in the ring and the gift of gab. I mean, there's never been another Roddy Piper. Yeah, we've had Brian Pillman, who in his craze phase did some great stuff. But I mean, there's never been Roddy Piper again. There's only been one Roddy Piper.
Real quick, and I'll let Robert sort of take the reins back. Before we started the show tonight, I put on, as I said before, the Roddy Piper documentary on the WWE Network, and two, I listened to the 1996 debut promo from Halloween Havoc, and it's one of my favorite, just because he spoke with such passion about. And who knows how much of that was real and how much of it wasn't. Kind of goes to what Larry was saying. It's like you never quite knew what you were getting with Piper. But Piper was able to, you know, to take a situation with Hogan. He had just beaten Savage in the ring for the millionth time, and it was like it was the highlight of the night. And I remember being glued to my seat watching him. You know, say, hey, not for nothing, but I'm just as big an icon as you. And like who, you know, like why is Piper getting all this mainstream attention? Well, that's the reason. You know, wrestling as we know it today was built on his shoulders as well as Hogan's and Vince's. And I loved that promo. I love the fact that he got in there, and whether he was or he wasn't, it certainly felt like he was talking right from the heart. Which is, I think, is an element that a lot of these guys that are emulating him fail to realize is that when Piper got in there, he dug. You know, he was like a method actor. He dug deep and those feelings and emotions came out, and it made you a believer. That's why we were with Piper.
No,
That
totally
promo,
accurate. Go ahead, Pat.
yeah, that promo is absolutely Roddy speaking from the heart. Because as much money as him and Hogan made together, working together, they've always had that kind of professionally bitter jealousy over one another. Hogan doesn't like it if someone says Piper built WrestleMania. Piper doesn't like it if someone says Hogan was the driving force. And there's always that game of one-upsmanship. And I think Bruce Pritchard was actually the guy who described it best. He said, those guys, for as long as they live, one of them is going to stand on their tiptoes when they meet. One of them is going to squeeze the other's hands a little bit harder when they shake hands. One of them is going to comment on how much hair the other guy's lost or how much weight the other guy's put on, because that's what those guys are. Those guys are just those competitive forces who were put together at the biggest point in time in their respective industry and were the zenith and where everybody has hoped to be again since those two got there. And Roddy tends to not get the credit there as much as Hogan does, because Hogan was the good guy and Hogan was the flag bearer and Roddy was the bad guy. And the thing is, Roddy was right on that level too. You know, Hogan wasn't standing in the ring alone with Dick Clark and and seeing Lou Albano have a gold record smash and Cyndi Lauper kicks and David Wolf body slam. You had to have a guy who was willing to be the Gaddafi of professional wrestling, and that was Roddy.
Yeah, you again, and this, a lot of what we've mentioned with Piper kind of goes to why I do Everyone Loves a Bad Guy to begin with. You know, Hogan was able to draw money wherever he went and whoever he was with, but when it came to building WrestleMania and then WWF, it wasn't just enough to draw money, you know, with Hogan. You had to be on his level in one way or another. Piper, not physically on Hogan's level, but in terms of the ability to talk people into the building and the ability to generate emotion from the fan base. Absolutely on Hogan's level, debatably better. Again, depending on where you were specifically, any given night, geographic location, subject material. But Piper was just such again, and Pat and I talked about this extensively. Piper was unafraid to get real heat. And that's something that it's not there anymore in professional wrestling. And Larry, you watch a lot of professional wrestling. I mean, a lot of professional wrestling, and God bless you.
You are understating the obvious, sir.
I try. I try very hard. So I'm curious for, as much as you've watched, I don't think anybody has ever gotten consistent heat anywhere he went the way Piper has. It doesn't matter where he was in the country, in the world. He was able to find something that made the audience want to throw bricks at his head.
Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, you'd have to go back, and that's the thing. It's like not since Piper. You'd have to go back to guys like the Bruiser and Freddie Blassie and shit like that to, and like the early days of the Horsemen when they were, getting piss thrown on them and almost getting stabbed and having their tires slashed. I mean, but yeah, as far as like you said, I mean, Portland, San Francisco, the California territory, Georgia, WWF, the Crockett territories. I mean, yeah, to put it bluntly, Roddy Piper was a fucking heat magnet. He got it everywhere. I mean, you're not understating at all. You're absolutely correct, and it's I mean, I wrote in the article because I don't like to underplay certain things, but like for as much as pro wrestling is great today, as far as the athletics and some of the matches I'm watching, like covering the G1, I mean, some of this stuff is just like, you see this, like, all this awesome wrestling, and that's great. But then there are just certain aspects of wrestling, which you guys have touched on, that you just don't get. You don't feel some of that realism in the talk. And, I mean, I've said over and over, the art of the promo is lost because we have to start every show with a 15-minute promo, it seems. And if you look back on great promos, and I wrote about this in my Dusty Rhodes piece, I said, tell me all of the great 15-minute Dusty Rhodes promos. And I'll tell you, you're never going to find one, because there wasn't one. Because Dusty didn't do 15 minutes filled with bullshit promos. Dusty Rhodes went out there and talked for 2 to 5 minutes, 5 minutes being the heavy, heavy high end, but probably in the 3.5 minute range. Dusty Rhodes went out there with nothing but raw emotion. And like I said, when I was a kid, like, I believed in Dusty. I believed because what Dusty could do. As a kid, I was like, well, shit, it's Dusty Rhodes. And as he said, I don't look like the athlete of the day. But if Dusty Rhodes could stand up against the bad guys, and if Dusty Rhodes could be the world champion, I mean, I could do something with my life. You know, as a little kid, I mean, that was just, I mean, I'm not going to lie, man, like, Dusty Rhodes sitting out there, and he goes, I'm sticking my hand out. My hand to your hand. My little hand was out, man, because I believed.
I want to,
okay?
I'm sorry, Larry. Finish.
I was just going to say, and that's just that realism that's not there. And whether it's a good guy like that or the evil, so to speak, of Roddy Piper, you believed in it. So.
I want to piggyback on that. Reasons why we sit back and we do these is, sure, they were childhood heroes. They were childhood icons for all of us. We're all around the same age, given a year here or there. But I think it goes even deeper than that, because I look at the wrestlers now, and the wrestlers now, maybe they did the indies for a little bit, but they all kind of come up, and it cuts both ways. They're coming up through a sanitized, homogenized performance center, Full Sail, NXT training world, so that they can be a product, a product on the WWE television. But by the same token, you have, this isn't the Wild West of professional wrestling anymore. It's not anything goes. It's it's a publicly held company, as I said before, and so the product has to be a certain way. And like Roddy Piper couldn't exist, I don't think, today in this, or even Dusty Rhodes for that matter, in this world. Roddy, I was listening. I had the volume on for the documentary before we started the show, and he started when he was 15 years old. And but Larry knows as much as anybody else. The territories, you had a different flavor of wrestling all around the country, dealing with different promoters. Back then, kayfabe was the thing, and so there were, people were very protective of the business. It was just a different world, and that's what molded Piper into the performer that he eventually became. And I think that those are the things that we all pick up on. And so we wonder why some of these guys can't quite, break through the glass ceiling as such, really can't quite get over the way that we remember some of our, someone like Piper or Dusty getting over. I think, it's the difference between that raw, that coming up through the ages and coming up through the territories, that raw feeling, those raw experiences versus this, very sanitized version that we've got going on in wrestling. I mean, I don't know how you guys feel about it, but that's what I see. I see Piper as being somebody who, the wrestling industry molded into into this great performer, and that's not the wrestling industry that exists today.
I don't disagree with that at all. And I think, you brought up Roddy's experiences first coming into the business as a 16-year-old kid in the 1970s with, his first match being against Larry the Axe Hennig, all 320 pounds of him, breaking Roddy's nose 10 seconds into his career. And you go back before Roddy became a pro wrestler, Roddy was a kid who was living on the streets when he was 13, 14, 15 years old. And, I always just looked up to Roddy and loved Roddy. And when I found that out about him, I said, oh, well, I can relate to that, because as a kid, when I was, 14, 15 years old, there were times where it was a month at a time where I wasn't staying at home. I was staying at a friend's house for a night, or staying in the subway station for the night, or at the park. And the way he talks about living on the street, I know he did it because I understand, because he's saying things that are true. Like, you don't sleep at night, you sleep during the day because it's not safe to go to sleep at night, which is true. And so he was a hard enough kid to come in at 16 because of those life experiences that most people don't have at that age and that particular time. And I think that toughness is what got him through. I don't think anybody breaking into the wrestling business that exists today has any idea of that going on, because largely you see the people breaking in are white-collar folks who have either some type of backing from their parents or what have you to start off, or they're people who have a background in something else with a degree where they were able to work in this field and save enough money where they could actually actively pursue a career as a traveling professional wrestler. That's not the way it was. That's the way it is now. And I think that a lot of the missing passion that you talked about, Mark, you hit the nail on the head, that the work ethic to get into it is very different. The steps to take in it is very different. And a prime example being Tough Enough, where, you know, you're not doing any of the things that Roddy or the guys in the 70s and 60s and beforehand had to do. You're put into the nice little homogenized performance center and run through very easy tasks for $250,000, where Roddy's first year in the business working as a pro, he probably made, you know, $250 in his first maybe 6 months.
There were nights where I'm sure he didn't get paid, because that was a popular thing to do to some guys. You know, hey, we'll bring you in, we'll give you, you know, $25, $50 or whatever. And they're like, oh, sorry, kid, didn't cover the door. I can't tell you how many horror stories I've heard from years past of guys that didn't get paid on the road. You know, they're just not getting, you know, same thing happens in music for a lot of bands. Like you play a gig and you don't have, you know, someone taking care of you. And so if a club owner can get over on you, or if a promoter can get over on you, not pay you.
Said they were here for you.
Dude, I got paid in concessions one night. Yeah.
Did you work for Paul Heyman, Larry?
What's that?
Did you work for Paul Heyman at that time, Larry?
No. It was one of those. We didn't have enough for your $25, kid. You can have what's left of the concession. So I left with a pizza and about 250 Solo cups.
we'll pay you in peanuts. No, literally. Peanuts.
Yeah. But no, to go to what you were saying, I've talked a lot about the WWE developmental system and stuff, and like one thing that is like refreshing to me is Fit Finley's son is working in Japan right now. Now, obviously, if Fit Finley wanted to get his son in WWE developmental, he'd be in. But he wants his son to travel around like he did to gain experience. He got a shot in the best of the Super Juniors. He signed with them. So he's going to be young lion for a while and work over there. And to me, I like seeing stuff like that. I mean, unfortunately, he got injured, but like Ricky Steamboat's kid did that for a little bit. He traveled around and stuff like that. And I think it's refreshing when you see guys that are still willing to do that, because, you know, they understand that, like, you're going to learn not just wrestling and grappling and stuff, but you're just going to learn so much more about the business. And even if you do go to WWE and you do have to change your stuff, I mean, you're going to have a bigger advantage. Like, a guy like Kevin Owens is a good example, because, I mean, Kevin Owens is still a lot Kevin Steen. And that's because he developed that over years. Now, obviously, there's going to be changes, but you see some of these guys coming through now, and it is refreshing that some of them are being able to stay a little more themselves instead of just, you know, how years ago, it annoyed me when it was like the Randy Orton clone factory. When you had like Mark Jindrak and all these guys that were 6'4" and they looked like fucking Abercrombie and Finch models and shit. And it's like, no, and don't get me wrong, there's a place. There is a place for those guys, but I mean,
baby oil and crappy tribal tattoos.
Oh God, dear Lord, I know. But there's also a place for, you know, the chubby dude and the crazy guy. I mean, you know, you look back on wrestling at any given point, and you know, you sit there and you talk about guys, and you see like these rich characters and these different shapes and sizes and everything, and that's one of the reasons, like, I personally dug wrestling, is like you had the Horsemen that they were assholes, but they were kind of cool, and then there was Dusty who made me believe, and then there was the hated Russian guy that eventually became a superpower friend of Dusty's, and, you know, it's just like, you see this great, like, kaleidoscope of characters, and to me, besides the great wrestling, that's what always has made wrestling so much fun for me. I mean, I love great wrestling, obviously, but when you have all these rich characters and different guys. I mean, that's just as important.
I get a lot of flack from the guys on the Casual Heroes, for this certain particular wrestlers that I happen to enjoy. But I'm right there with you, Larry. I remember as a kid, sure, I loved the Ultimate Warrior. I don't know if you caught that earlier, but he was my favorite wrestler growing up because of what he looked like and what he did and everything else. But and the second one is Diesel. Yeah, so as you can tell, I'm not a huge fan of work rate, but they both had a look that I was mesmerized by. And I enjoyed seeing, you had everything from King Kong Bundy and John Tenta, Earthquake. I was talking to my wife recently about Uncle Fred, who was Tugboat and the Shockmaster. She was like, she said to me, and I, if you've seen pictures of me online, I'm not svelte. He was like, she's like, if you were a little bit taller and were born about 20 years earlier, you'd look like every other professional wrestler out there. And that's because they ran the gamut of guys that were, Ivan Putski and, superstar Billy Graham, and had muscles on top of muscles, all the way to the Hillbilly Jims and the Uncle Elmers. Do you remember Uncle Elmer? What?
Of course we remember Uncle Elmer. And Cousin Junior.
Yes. When they started putting on the Saturday Night Lives on the network, and I was like, Jesus, wrestling has changed. But that was the great. It was like you got everything from, like I said, the Ivan Putskis to the Uncle Elmers and everything in between, and it was awesome.
And Uncle Elmer provided one of Roddy's best moments to get it back to Roddy, because during his wedding, of course, they're in the ring and the ceremony's going on, and Roddy just has to be Roddy. And he didn't even do a whole lot. He didn't say anything completely witty. It was just for Roddy to come out, yo stank, this whole wedding stinks. And just, that's all he had to do. And it was just great.
Winfrey, what do you say in the few minutes we have lessons? We have, you've got about 20 minutes and a lot of, and some big time talkers here. You want to do like favorite matches or just, your favorite Roddy moments? What do you think?
That'll work. I have no problem going with favorite moments. Everybody gets, 3 and be relatively brief about them. Personally, yeah, my favorite Roddy moments. One, ironically enough, I didn't watch this live just for the sheer crash TV value of it when he shot on Vince Russo in the middle of one of the early episodes of TNA Impact.
Oh, Lord.
For any of you who haven't seen it, this is, again, one of those hilarious car crash segments that you can't help but watch.
How about when you killed my cousin Owen, man?
And watching Vince Russo just get more and more uncomfortable being in the same ring as Piper. And then eventually having to bail because Piper's a little bit unstable. And even, not being in the prime of his life, he might have decided that, I don't like Vince Russo and I'm going to shatter him into a million pieces. Matt, there's an odd one. This might be a really odd one to talk about, but his appearance on that HBO Beyond the Mat special where he talked at length
Real Sports.
Where he talked at length about a lot of the kind of the underbelly, the seediness, the drug problems, all the stuff that was going on in the wrestling business. And he did that. Nowadays, it's expected. You're either retired, you're doing shoot videos, or stuff like that is expected. He stood up and talked about something that was very unpopular to talk about. It got him blackballed from the promotion, but he stood up and he talked about something because he thought it was important. And that's a tremendous, there's a tremendous amount of strength of character within that. And that's one of the things that I'm always going to remember about Piper. And this is a guy who, you guys, we've touched on it here, and I'm going to be done. I'm going to move on to, Mark after this. But this is a guy who there has never been another one. In a business that is so steeped in borrowing, stealing, plagiarizing, all of that from other people, from what's come before. There's the joke, there's nothing new in wrestling. type of scenario because it's all been done at this point. And if you don't believe me about that, there's a Japanese match where you had to win by setting off a firecracker that was shoved down your opponent's pants. I'm not lying about this.
This is true. This is true.
There's
FMW.
everything. There's been, everything. And despite all of that, there's only one Hot Rod. There's only ever been one Roddy Piper. And no one, even, the best imitation of him still comes off as a cheap, pale imitation. And in a business like that, William Regal said it about someone else, and I forget who he said it about, so someone feel free to chime in. But he said that, in a business like this, he gave the world a true one of. There is no one else. There is only one of Roddy Piper. And that's one of the things that that I will always kind of carry with me. So, Mark, your favorite moments, matches, again, 2 or 3 of them, and then we'll move on to Pat and Larry.
I already spoke about his interaction with Hogan at the 96 Halloween Havoc, where, he gave it right back to him and said, I'm just as big an icon as you. But before that, I have 3, and they're more feuds than moments. But I asked Robert, because I was in the middle of doing family stuff, to put the show up tonight, and he put the picture up, and he used the picture that he has in his Everyone Loves a Bad Guy from last year. Had I put a picture up, it would have been Piper, half black, half white. His feud. I grew up in an all-black neighborhood, and when he did that, I had all-black friends. I listened to rap music when I was in elementary school, and Bad News Brown was one of my favorite wrestlers when he came out, because that guy was like my neighborhood, and the 2 of them feuded. I was on cloud 9. I was like, yeah, this is Raw. This is going to be fantastic. And I can't remember. Pat probably will fill in the blanks here, but I can't remember what his rationale for painting himself half black was. But I
don't think he was ever given one.
He was saying he was trying to be. Part of it was that he was trying to be Michael Jackson, being part black and part white, and that he thought it would catch on because Cyndi Lauper had just come out with the song True Colors, and Apartheid had just ended the year before, so he thought it was being very topical.
Okay, whatever his reasons were, I just remember my visceral reaction to it. But I also remember the matches, and I really did. I loved his feud with Bad News Brown. Another one. Speaking of Bad News Brown, every interaction and mild racism against Mr. T. Boy. I was a fan of Mr. T. I was a huge fan of the A-Team. That's the one show that my parents would let me stay up and watch. With their permission. The whole other story there. But they would let me stay up past my bedtime to watch the A-Team, which was my favorite show when I was a kid. And Mr. T obviously was on it. And of course, everything I just said about Bad News Brown applies to Mr. T as well. So his whole interaction with Hogan and Piper and everything, definitely drew me in as a fan. But Piper and Mr. T, and what seemed like it was very real at times, where Piper just being absolutely disgusted with Mr. T and wanting to literally take his head off. Absolutely loved it. And the third one may catch you by surprise, doesn't involve a black person. However, fat, effeminate, Adrian Adonis. Oh, boy. For some odd reason, that whole feud really spoke to me, and I remember just how vicious it was, how vicious Adrian Adonis was. This was when Piper had turned face, and there was a whole bit with the flower shop and Piper's pit and everything. And you talk about sucking me in as a fan and making me interested in your feud. Those 2 did it, and I think it was WrestleMania 3 when they locked it up. And I know that Hogan and Andre was the draw, and the match everyone remembers was Steamboat and Savage. But I definitely was also there for Junkyard Dog and Harley Race, and Adrian Adonis and Roddy Piper. Both of them absolutely captured my imagination.
All right, Pat. I know, again, you and Mark are both from that New York, the Northeast, and so, by and large, so Roddy's played a massive role in your development of loving professional wrestling. So again, your top 2 or 3 Piper feuds, moments, matches, what have you.
The first one is probably my very favorite thing Roddy ever did. It was at a press conference for the first WrestleMania, and Roddy wound up being late alongside. It was supposed to be him, Orndorff, and Orton on one side, Hogan, Mr. T, and Snuka on another, and Roddy was late coming in. And to get to his seat, he had to actually walk past Mr. T. Well, one of the rules with dealing with Mr. T is that you're not allowed to touch him, and Roddy didn't know that. So as Roddy walks in, Mr. T flexes his bicep at Roddy and goes, pretty hard, huh? And Roddy touches Mr. T on the head and goes, pretty soft, huh? And that turned into a whole thing where T tried to dive at him, and they got into a whole scuffle, and Vince looks at him and goes, if that didn't come off so well, I was going to be so mad at you for being late. So that's probably my favorite, because it's just Roddy being Roddy, and just that quick wit and just playing the situation totally to his advantage despite it being totally against him. Favorite Roddy match, I would probably point to his WrestleMania 8 match with Bret Hart from Indianapolis for the Intercontinental Championship, because it was Roddy really believing in somebody and doing everything he could to try to put them over, to show that Roddy wanted to give as much as he got. And it's a different Piper match because Roddy, we talked about, he always started those matches like a crazy barroom brawl. The psychology is different there because now Roddy's walking in as a champion, and you have to come take the belt from Roddy. So it was a different kind of match. He worked with a guy in Bret who could bring the best out of an opponent in that situation. And if you remember, Bret actually did a blade job in that match, but was very discreet, and it seemed real. And after the match, they're hugging each other like family because they're loose cousins. And Roddy's apologizing for busting him open, and they got away with it at a time when you couldn't blade in the WWF. And Ric Flair and Randy Savage got fined for doing the same thing on the same show later. And as far as just like my favorite Roddy feud or memory, you might remember in 1989 when Roddy's big comeback was being promoted, that he was going to do the Brother Love show, or Piper was one show. And so Bruce Pritchard, his Brother Love, cut a bunch of promos making fun of Roddy and wearing a kilt, and they brought in the biggest mouth on TV at the time, who was Morton Downey Jr. And that was a huge thing to see the biggest mouth on TV, the biggest mouth in the WWF, which was Brother Love, and the biggest mouth there used to be in Roddy. And Roddy had been gone for 2 years off TV. He wasn't involved in wrestling at all. And he came back in Atlantic City at WrestleMania 5 with Brother Love and Morton Downey. Not only, just gets the best of them verbally, but I think everybody remembers the whole spot where Morton keeps blowing smoke in Roddy's face. And, Mr. Downey, that's like the third time you've done that. And I'm going to say this to you again. Don't blow no more smoke in my face. And Morton does it again, of course. So Roddy, being Roddy, is ready and has a fire extinguisher. And as soon as Morton turns around, blasts him with it and even sticks it up his ass to get a good laugh. And at one point, Morton grabs for Roddy's leg, and Roddy, being from the old school, is ready to bash him over the head. And Arnold Skolin has to yell, "No, Roddy, don't do it!" And Roddy kind of just stops himself and marches off triumphant, as only Roddy can. And that's probably the three I would come up with.
Was that Arnold or was that Gorilla Monsoon? Because I've heard both versions of that.
It was Arnie, because Gorilla was way up in the booth, or not the booth, but okay, the elevated platform with Jesse doing commentary. Okay.
Yeah, that was again, and he almost did drop that fire extinguisher on Mr. Downey, as he called. All right, Larry. Again, real quickly, if there's one last question I want to pose to all of you before we close up shop here. Your favorite, again, 2 or 3 favorite moments, feuds, matches with Roddy Piper.
Yeah, I'll move it along. Like I said, for good or for bad, you have to look at Piper's Pit, because while there have been a lot of bad stuff, I mean, again, he was the architect for what would be every wrestler trying to do a talk show segment. It all goes back to everybody wanting to be as cool as Roddy Piper. So, I mean, you have to love him for that. Again, the dog collar match. It was just that I was such the NWA fan, and just the realness and everything. And I go back and watch it now and just appreciate it so much more because of the storytelling, the psychology, the commentary work in the match. I think Pat just talked about the WrestleMania match with Bret Hart. The most important thing about that match to me is that's like one of Piper's just greatest wrestling matches. There's no bullshit. There's no gimmick. There's nothing weird. He's having this great wrestling match, and as you guys will remember, Piper did not he didn't have a clean loss for like the longest time. He never jobbed to Hogan. He didn't do jobs, and the fact that he was going to go to WrestleMania, he was finally a champion of some sort. He not only has this great match, but as Pat said, he believed in Bret, put Bret over. I mean, that match is just so great. That's one of my favorite matches to go back and watch because it's such like an unexpected great WrestleMania match. Like, you probably look at it and think it's going to be good, but it's so great. And it felt so different from everything the company was doing. And a real quick last one, something that a lot of people seem to overlook, his greatest acting achievement, a tour de force, the greatest wrestling movie ever made, fucking Body Slam with Dirk from the A-Team. That is like
Rick Roberts.
I cannot tell you how many times I watched that goddamn movie on HBO when I was young. I loved that damn movie. And it's because Piper's so over the top. It's just, it's like you said, it's like there's no other Roddy Piper guys, and certain things he does. I mean, I kind of say it tongue in cheek, like Body Slam is not like a great thing in acting achievement, but it's just if you were a wrestling fan at that time and you were a fan of Piper and stuff, that movie's so great to watch. So that's what I got.
I have to bring up one that I had neglected to mention. My favorite, just because Piper was such a great villain, and even in the little things, he managed to be a monumental douchebag. He and Cowboy Bob Orton shaving the head of the Haiti Kid. I never. Always good for a laugh.
Oh,
all right.
So good.
Last question we got to talk about here. It stands to reason that the WWE is going to do some stuff, in memoriam of Piper, especially, with Raw coming up. Here's the question that Gavin Napier wanted posed. I'm just going to go down the line here with, Mark, Pat, and Larry. Given that the WWE recently decided to excise Hulk Hogan from everything, when you're paying tribute to Roddy Piper, what are they going to do? Are they going to include Hogan or are they going to exclude Hogan? Because either way seems like they can't do it. I mean, they've just removed him. Whitewashed. Get it? Subtle racism. And so, putting him back onto television, even, with archived footage is, maybe not something they're willing to do so close to the scandal. But talking about Piper's career without Hogan is, it's like talking about Lex Luthor without talking about Superman. It doesn't work. So, Mark, which way do you think they go with this? How do you think they play this?
Well, I'm going to answer you this way. I'm going to make the argument that it can be done because you can talk about the Rock and Wrestling connection by just showing the footage of Piper, Albano, Lauper, that whole thing. Skip WrestleMania 1 entirely, go right to WrestleMania 2 and Mr. T and go from there. You're okay, actually. Piper and Hogan had that one feud leading up to WrestleMania. And then I don't know how much longer Pat's usually better with the details than I am with stuff like that. But between WrestleMania and WrestleMania 2, Hogan went on the feud with the Heenan family. King Kong Bundy and so on. So it wouldn't be the most complete history, obviously, but it can be done. You can say, if I'm producing this thing and I'm told you have to Chris Benoit Hulk Hogan from the story of Roddy Piper. Roddy Piper helped build the WWF under Vince McMahon when Vince McMahon wanted to go national by establishing the Rock and Wrestling connection, essentially a feud with Cyndi Lauper. And you can talk about, he was on MTV, and then he would continue working with celebrities like Mr. T and go into that, and then you don't have to bring up Hogan anymore because from there it's Adrian Adonis and Bret Hart, et cetera, et cetera. So if you have to do it that way, that's the way to do it.
Well, given that Mark is exponentially more creative and intelligent with the editing process than most of the higher-ups in World Wrestling Entertainment, I doubt they're going to go that way, but we'll find out. Pat, again, Hogan and Piper, their interconnectivity as far as paying tribute to Piper goes. How do you think it goes for that? What do you think we're going to get as a final presentation on Monday?
If they exclude Hogan, they're pretty much going to have to exclude anything Roddy did in WCW, because realistically, they brought Roddy into WCW specifically to feud with Hogan. So you're going to act as though Roddy's career ended in 1996 after the fight with Goldust, and that nothing again ever happened until Roddy came back to WWE in early 2003 when he came in. Early 2003 when he showed up during the match between, ironically enough, Hulk Hogan and Vince McMahon, and
did they
feuded
run
with
the
Mr. America. So maybe that's my next question. So maybe
it was Mr. America.
Maybe they just go with Mr. America as the primary feud. But it can be done that they don't include Hogan. Obviously, I don't think they're going to include any clips of Hogan talking about Roddy, even if it's archived footage like recorded for Roddy's DVD or Hulk's DVD or whatever. I don't think they'll use it. But I do think they're going to have to make mention of Piper working on top against Hogan in Madison Square Garden for the war to settle the score, for WrestleMania, for all these things where they were juxtaposed against each other in the national spotlight covered by mainstream media. It's not complete if you don't do that, and I think a lot of people, if they do that, are going to feel gypped, and they're going to feel that they gypped Roddy in a tribute just because they're mad at Hulk, and they shorted Roddy because of it, which is ironic in a way because Roddy got shorted a lot of times because of Hulk.
Well, he finally got one over on him in this case. A big scandal about Hulk Hogan and racism, and, well, what are we all talking about a few days later? Roddy Piper. All right, Larry, again, you're going to be watching this, providing your recaps of it. So how do you think they're going to wind up handling doing this kind of, maybe in memory of Piper and the interspersed tributes that we're probably going to get?
I think on Raw, they're going to probably just show the recut Hall of Fame video that they posted today, because there's no Hogan in that. I would assume that they do something like that, and then maybe like Dusty throw in a couple, Roddy Piper moments, which will be like the Jimmy Snuka stuff and the Morton Downey Jr. stuff and stuff like that. And then I figure they'll have they'll probably do a network special, and they'll do a lot of talking heads with a bunch of the younger guys that don't remember a lot of Piper, but will kind of toe the company line. And then they'll probably bring in I would assume they bring in Flair to talk about all the the Crockett Georgia stuff, and then the fact that him and Piper were really close friends. I'd also expect them to use Goldust because Dustin's been very adamant that the WrestleMania match with Piper was a big thing for him. And they'll unfortunately probably skip everything and anything they can about Hogan because of his little persona non grata deal, because apparently for years when he said, "Let me tell you something, brother," he was just cleaning it up, I guess. I don't know. I've been saving that one for someone. You guys got it. So, but no, seriously, I mean, I think it's a shame. Listen, I think racism fucking sucks. Don't get me wrong. But he didn't kill anybody. You don't have to totally erase anything when you're trying to pay tribute to Roddy Piper. You know what I'm saying? But I know why they're doing it, because they're somebody. Oh yeah. Oh, trust me, dude. Look at the Hall of Fame. Look at that fucking lineup. Okay, we could talk all day about that shit. But I mean, the fact is he'll probably be excluded, and it's going to shortchange Piper. But hopefully they have Flair and some of those guys on, and they can do something that'll be at least interesting.
If it wasn't a publicly held company, they wouldn't have done what they did with Hogan. But
that and the fact that the kids deals with Mattel and stuff, that's why they're doing it. Publicly traded company deals with kids companies and stuff. They can't be associated. I get it from a business standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I said. If this is not a publicly held company, it's they probably the things that Hogan says, do not reflect our company values, blah blah. And then they put the title on Titus O'Neil just to make everyone happy. But they can't do stuff like that. because
They don't have to take the belt off of Rollins. He's Puerto Rican.
But seriously, folks, it's like, they're going to pretend Hogan has no history in this company, the company he helped build, because of unfortunate private things that were said. It's just it's a whole other podcast.
Listen, they've done it. They've done it before. They did it with Bruno for years. They'll do it with Hulk too.
You're right. And to this day, you have a what was it, WrestleMania 20 match between. It says on the DVD now the WrestleMania 20 match between Shawn Michaels and Triple H, and they conveniently leave out Chris Benoit.
You mean Stevie Richards?
Stevie Richards is the joke because they replace all instances with Stevie Richards.
My favorite graphic I get to use whenever that match is, it's the graphic from the match, and you see Shawn and Hunter, and then there's a bunch of text that says, and versus nobody else. Don't look at the other over there. I use it any chance I get because it's like I think the Raw, the title history site when Randy Orton wins the first title on Benoit, is like Randy Orton defeated the Raw heavyweight champion or some shit. Now again, see, that's what frustrates me. I get not advertising Chris Benoit. I get that you can't search for him on the network. I get all that shit. But the fact is, he's there. You don't have to, when they put out the encyclopedia, he's in it, and you can search for him in the index in the back and shit. I mean, his name is not going to offend anybody. Now, if you come out with the 20 Deadly Moves of Chris Benoit DVD, yeah, then you're being an asshole. We don't need to do that. I mean, I'm not trying to be like an ass about it, but it's like, I understand. I mean, don't promote the guy. Don't make any new shit. Avoid him when you can. But right. If you're, like Chris Jericho talked about, when they were doing the DVD stuff and how difficult it was to, he had so much resistance on these great matches because there was all these tags and singles with Benoit. And he's like, listen, I understand the situation, but you asked me what I thought were the best things in my career, and now you're asking me to exclude it because of this.
Larry, you watched all those Monday Night War 1 hour documentaries on the network, right?
For the most part.
Okay, when they're talking about the guys they brought over from ECW and everything, it's like they unfortunately can't get away from Eddie Guerrero and Dean Malenko, and they're edited as if those were the only two guys that ECW had that and this just revolves around those two. It's like, nope, there was another guy in there, broke Sabu's neck and everything.
There were two other guys, but Terry Saturn doesn't count.
I was talking to my wife about it, and I was like, what's funny is we were live at Raw the night the Radicals debuted, and I was joking with her. I was like, wow, we were there for a really cool moment that they'll never talk about again.
Right. Which is now known as the night Eddie Guerrero showed up.
Yeah, this is the night Eddie came, and everything was cool. But yeah, I get why they do it because it's a business and they're publicly traded and they deal with all these kids companies, and you have to be careful and you have to please these partners and these stockholders, and I get all that. I get firing Hogan. I get stopping all production on anything Hulk Hogan related. But I mean, to the point that they're trying to almost erase it, it's you're kind of getting into lunacy now.
Well, I get, it's
just a little.
We talk about
this isn't the fucking Brooklyn Brawler.
We talk about World War II, right? It's like, okay, World War II, this happened. We don't conveniently skip over the Holocaust. Well, the Japanese do, but but the rest of the world don't conveniently skip over Pearl Harbor and and the Holocaust and everything. It's all there, but that the difference is you can acknowledge that something happened and it was a terrible thing. What you don't do is then try to make money off of it. So everything you're saying is right. Is stopping all production, firing the guy, and saying good luck in your future endeavors, but we are not going to touch you. That's an appropriate response. To pretend he was never in the company doesn't make any sense and is overboard. But
yeah, I mean, and again, this isn't some J-Bro jobber that went psycho and went on a racist rant or something. I mean, I'm like you, Mark. I wasn't a big Hulk Hogan fan. But to say that, you could tell the history of wrestling without Hulk Hogan is fucking ludicrous.
God forbid,
lunacy.
God forbid, like Vince McMahon gets like Alzheimer's or dementia or something and runs someone over with his car, like old men do at times, unfortunately. Just like or does something horrible, between now and whenever it is he passes. Are they going to then pretend? Are we never going to pretend he existed either? Like suddenly Vince McMahon disappears from the Attitude Era. Steve Austin.
It's insanity to try and do stuff like that. All right, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up now. Oh, I will say this. My favorite reaction to the Hulk Hogan thing was a picture of Booker T, close up of his face. He's in the middle of his sucker routine, so his mouth is open. He looks very happy and smiling. And the overlay to that picture is Hulk Hogan, we finally got you, N-word. Playing off of that very famous WCW bit where Booker T flubbed that line. All right. That wraps us up here tonight, everybody. Thank you for listening. Thank you for following along while we shared our fond memories of Roddy Piper and a few thoughts about WWE's business practices, because hey, why not? All right, for Mark, Larry, Pat, I'm Robert. No plugs tonight. I don't feel like it, and really they're unnecessary at this point. Although I have one plug. This Saturday I will be watching someone else using the nickname Rowdy, as Ronda Rousey is going to murder a Brazilian in the middle of the octagon. Seriously,
Brazilian
that's going to be
hostage. That's her name. Her name is Brazilian Pig Hostage. Hey, I know you said no plug, but allow Larry to at least plug the Piper-related stuff.
Okay. Larry, what do you got that's related to Piper?
Yeah, real quick. I mean, obviously we have all the info on his passing and the relevant comments on his death. I have an article up just sharing a lot of stuff I talked about his career. It's kind of it's a reaction column, so obviously I can't do the whole career justice. It's just a lot of my memory, and I'm hoping Sunday morning we should have a staff round table up with some guys chiming in their thoughts similar to like what we were doing here, and I'm sure some other guys will pop in with some columns, and that's probably about it. We'll just cover it the best we can, and like I said, it sucks, man, especially so close to Dusty's passing. It's just like I said, it's getting harder and harder at times, and it's a shame. 61 isn't old, man. And,
no, not at all.
Like I said real quick in my column, I said Piper was a guy who lived a hard life in many ways. He survived this business. He traveled the roads. He lived a hard life. He survived Hopkins lymphoma, a hip replacement. I thought the dude was going to outlive me. I mean, not that I'm a beacon of health if you know me, but come on. I mean, I thought Piper was just going to be a guy that was always there, and to see him pass away at 61, it's a little shocking in some ways, but in other ways, I've kind of unfortunately grown numb to it over the last 11 years of covering this stuff. So.
Yeah, it's rough. I'll be looking forward to some of the content that comes out related to Piper. All right, everyone, that's it. Thanks for being here. Again, you can find all of us around. We're all around. I'm not going to do extended plugs, so we're all available. You can find us. You can follow us. You can read our material, so on and so forth, throughout the internet. We're all around. We're, ubiquitous almost. All right, everyone, thank you for listening. And I'm going to modify our outro just a bit. No music tonight. I'm just going to cut it off after I'm done talking here. This gets brought up. It needs to be brought up again. Again, Piper, 61, not old. Again, the average human lifespan in North America is closer to 90 than 60. So, again, young in terms of that. Make sure you express to the people around you how much you love them, how much you care for them, because this can happen to anyone at any time. Life's fragile, and don't take it for granted. On that note, as we always say here, please everyone be well, be safe, and behave.